Chris. How is everybody doing? I didn't quite know exactly what this was, but when I got a call 3 weeks ago saying, are you talking to me? Would you like to talk, have a conversation with Chris? I was really excited. We don't know each other that well, but I was a big fan of your work, and also just a little bit of connection we had on the movement that you spearheaded to preserve film, actual film, as a medium. Means of archiving as the only reliable means right now. I was very happy to be able to sit down. In anticipation, I rewatched some of your work. Check. 1, 2. How about now? Can you turn up the volume? Check. Maybe just on one of the mics that I'm wearing. Can you see if you're on? How's that?
Yes, better.
Check. Anyway, I rewatched some of your work and noticed things that maybe I hadn't put together. But I wonder, as you think about your body of work and what interests you moving forward, do you see the connection in what you do, and what are the themes and through lines?
It's interesting for me. I like to characterize it this way, which is I try and begin every film with some kind of interesting question, a set of questions. And it's only as I get into it that I realise that they were questions that were sort of hanging over from the last one I did. So there's some kind of continuity of theme or investigation or whatever that is. I'm not really very conscious of it, but I think I try to be open to leaving myself questions at the end of the film, and then try and start the next project with some sense of investigation or further in the theme. But I try not to be too analytical about it, because then you get self-conscious and you don't want to repeat yourself and all that.
Maybe I shouldn't point out things that I know. It's interesting because the scale of your films have gotten so big. You started about as small as you can be with following, which cost $3,000. $3,000. $5,000. And Memento, which was also a very small film. And both of them, right out of the gate, just phenomenal work, craftsmanship, but conceptually, everything. Intimidatingly so, like right out of the box. But as the films got bigger, you can become absorbed in the spectacle of the craft and everything, but you've maintained, I think, some really fascinating and possibly revealing interests and anxieties. I watched Inception again last night and was really taken by the motivation of Leonardo DiCaprio's character, which is simply to get to his children, just have this human connection. But in order to do it, he has to become superhuman and do impossible things. He's granted a mythological challenge. But that's the same with Interstellar. And even Memento, he's tasked an impossible thing, and also the guilt of these characters. and I just want to acknowledge, and I'll ask you a couple of questions about it. To me, that's the mark of a director, of a filmmaker, and an artist, when there is this consistency of thematic content. And as big as these films are, they just felt very intimate, very personal, and so I applaud you for that. Backstage, you said, I wonder if I were to edit all of my films, take all my films as footage and put them and make one film out of them, what I could make. What would it be?
Very long. No, I don't know, and that's what's interesting about it. You know, the thing about editing is you know, I mean, you particularly take a very long time to do films and try all different things. And I've always edited in a huge hurry. I've always felt like trying to catch the thing, the lightning in the bottle, whatever that energy is, that excitement we have. And the bigger the film's got, the more obsessively I've tried to get the film together very, very quickly off the shoot, so that 10 weeks, you know, this is a DGA cut length, I could show it at the studio and it's done, you know, visual effects and everything, and do it in a real hurry, just so that, you know, the energy is kind of there. And then we spend a lot of time, you know, trimming it, refining it, doing music, whatever. And so, I was thinking about editing as a more stick process, as a more impressionistic process. And, you know, if you took your films as the raw material, you know, what connections you would make. And I don't know, it'd be a fascinating experiment, something to try. I certainly would start to see a lot of the same shots cropping up. But I've really, as I said, tried not to be too reactive in what I do. I've tried to always put the camera where I'm most excited about seeing from. You know, getting the actors in the morning, watching them do the scene, and just being instinctive about how to shoot the thing, and not think too much, kind of feeling a bit more. And so that's really been my process, and trying not to engage in too much self-examination so as not to be too self-conscious.
Well, maybe we'll go back to the beginning about the process and try to understand a little bit about how somebody gets to a place where you're really working on the largest scale, some of the most sophisticated, technically sophisticated films being made. What is your first memory of film?
First memory of going to a film, I think it's probably seeing Snow White re-release. I very much remember seeing the evil witch, you know, she's dead, the evil queen transformed herself into that witch with the apple, being absolutely terrified, kind of going down the floor of the movie theatre behind the scenes, that kind of thing. And then first memories of sort of making films, I started borrowing my dad's Super 8 camera when I was about 7 years old, and you know, just using tools and stuff and doing bits of random animation, stop motion without tripod, which doesn't work very well. But you know, putting toys in front of the camera, just trying to get shots, and then send it away. And 2 weeks later, it would come back and you could see the new film. Did a lot of that kind of experimentation growing up. So those are my earliest memories of the process.
Is there a specific film that ever triggered your interest to become involved with making film?
Very much the first Star Wars. That came out when I was 7 years old, and I'd already been experimenting shooting Super 8 films using kind of army toys and stuff. And then from the second I saw Star Wars, everything was spaceships and science fiction, and you know, trying to do that. And I would make these imaginatively titled Super 8 films called Space Wars. You know. And I actually showed a couple of them to my kids recently because I finally got them to transfer them to DVD, and I was a little disappointed how bad they were. And I realized it's a sort of weird thing about a filmmaker's process, or certainly my process, which is I sort of remember them the way I wanted them to be, in the way I kind of thought they were, and they weren't. I don't know how you are looking back at your old films, but they tend to change over time. Not always for the best.
I'm afraid to look back, and I never do. I really never do. At what point, at what age, did you first consider the prospect of actually doing this for a living?
I was about 12 or 13, and I just became struck by the idea of a director, and it was as a result of watching Ridley Scott's 2 science fiction films he made, Alien and then Blade Runner, and sort of examining them and realizing that there was something that connected them that wasn't the cast or the story, or even really the fact that it was science fiction film. It was kind of a mind behind it, a feeling behind it that you could really identify. And I remember talking to my dad about that. He worked in advertising during that era when great directors like Ridley Scott and his brother Tony, Alan Parker and Hugh Hudson were coming up, and he'd actually worked with some more stuff. And I sort of started to identify the idea that there was a job you could do that was being a director, and that was sort of the closest thing to filmmaking, whatever filmmaking had been to doing with my Super 8 camera. That seemed to be the job, as opposed to being a producer or a writer or other things. That seemed to be the job closest to my creative process. So all the way through my growth as a filmmaker, my development, I've also tried to cling to that same creative process, whatever that thing is, that fascination with capturing an image and then putting it sequentially with another image to create a narrative.
Was there a moment when you became confident, like maybe this is possible? Or did you never question the prospect?
I think the confidence that I've had has come from the fact that I've always loved making films at whatever level I could. And to me, that's always been as valid a filmmaking experience as there is. So when I was using a Super 8 camera, making these, ridiculous little science fiction films, to me that was the same thing as what I get to do now. And so the confidence that I have comes from the knowledge that even if I couldn't hear a huge budget and big stars, whatever, I could make a film on the tabletop somewhere, and I would be as invested in that as in the bigger films. And so I think if you can allow everything outside the frame to fall away, if you can just always be obsessed with the image, what's in the frame and what that's doing to the story, you can get creative fulfillment at whatever scale you're working on.
Out of curiosity, how many actually aspiring filmmakers are there today? It's amazing. It's such a curious profession because there's no prescription. You can go to film school, but if you trace the career path of directors, it seems almost random.
It's always different. I don't know, I'm sure you, like me, will often have aspiring filmmakers who are starting out, like themselves, ask for advice, and they're looking for the answers, and it's the key. And I did it myself. I mean, I had the chance to talk to Stephen Frears once when I was starting out, and I said, what advice do you have? And he said, be a lucky man. And he saw how crestfallen I was, so he sort of stopped and said, okay, well, the only other advice I give you is get a script and hang on to that script, no matter who tries to buy it from you, who tries to push you off it, put a real director on it. And that was pretty useful advice, but that's really the only good advice I've ever heard. The only good advice I've been able to give is, if you're lucky enough to be telling a story with a camera on whatever scale you're doing, appreciate that as filmmaking. Don't always be waiting for the real film to come along, because you may be making a real film.
Master the task at hand.
Exactly, and enjoy it.
When I look back, actually, what you described as falling in love with it before having the opportunity to be intimidated by it is my experience too, and it's also, I think, something that's common amongst filmmakers, that before you have time to even question it. So how did you make the leap to, going from a kid messing around with Super 8 to making a feature film?
I think if there's one thing that I've been very fortunate in my development as a filmmaker, it's that I've always worked at a comfortable scale somehow. So I started very, very small. And then after I did Following, I had written the script for Momentum and I had that sort of ready to go. And so as we got a bit of interest at film festivals and we started screening Following, I eventually got a small level of distribution through Tribeca here in New York. Then I was able to show people the script for Memento, and it had a similarly non-linear structure. It had various things in common. It was a difficult script to read on the page, but Following was a very good illustration of how it might work on screen. And so that was very helpful. And then doing Memento, we had about $3.5 million to make the film. That was a huge leap. That was the moment in which you had to just turn up to work and see all these trucks, these people hanging around, and this big machine, and go, okay, I'm just diving in now. And I think where I've been fortunate is I then moved on. You know, people often forget that the film we did the world premiere of the first Tribeca Film Festival with Insomnia, which we were talking about backstage today. That was a very comfortable step up as a first studio film, the first time working with huge movie stars like Al Pacino and Robert Williams, Hilary Swank, you know. And so there are a lot of directors now who get thrown into much bigger films, having done their version of Memento, whatever that is. And I actually got a much more comfortable sort of path into bigger and bigger films. And that was doing my first studio film in that way. That was a very key part of gaining the confidence to ignore the huge machinery around it, not feel the weight of that every time you told somebody to put the camera.
Stepping back, you said, you know, get a script, you wrote Memento. How did you learn to write a script like that?
I didn't and I couldn't. I mean, it's the classic example of something interesting that can come about when you don't know what you're doing. When you're starting out and you think, well, why are there these rules? Why do people take screenwriting courses? Why can't you just sit down and write the movie that you want to see as it appears on the screen? And you do it, and for whatever reason it works. If I tried to do that again now, it would be a horrible failure. So, you know, that instinct that when you're starting out, that energy you have, I think is a wonderful thing, and it's to be cherished. And then, as you learn more and more, it becomes harder and harder to forget the rules and push them to one side. And it's something you have to keep striving to do. I think it gets harder as you get more experience.
There's a principle in economics, I forgot what it's called, but innovation is attributed to that very tendency to take on a task unaware of what it truthfully would take to complete the thing, but you've committed. And of course, if it's not life or death, it feels like life or death. And the innovation and creativity that comes out of the necessity accounts for, not just in art, but in industry and science, similar thing. And as you get older, and you see what can go wrong and how lucky you feel that you survived that one, I wonder if you become more risk averse.
Definitely. You also, it's not just that you see what can go wrong, you have more to lose. You have more at stake, and when you're starting out, you have nothing to lose. You also have nothing to gain by being the same as everybody else. And as you know, when you're starting out as a filmmaker, you have to have a voice, you have to have something distinct about what it is you're doing. And it has to be sincere. You can't throw it in as a gimmick. It's got to be something you truly believe, but it has to be there. You can't sort of say, I want to jump, both feet into the film business and making a film that's a kind of middle-of-the-road, ordinary film, because no one has any reason to trust you to do that. Even if you could do it, there's no reason. So you have to be, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. So you pile in and you try and reinvent movies. You try and reinvent the wheel. That's what you do. You get in and say, why not do it this way?
So, what are you afraid of now as you move forward, if anything?
I'm afraid of tons of things. I think my biggest fear is embarking on a project that you lose faith with or you fall in love with. And I've done everything to sort of avoid that in my career, because for me, I mean, all filmmakers are different, but for me, each film, I'm sure this is the same for you, because you take your time with the film. So there's a huge investment of time and your life and your energy. And for me, the big fear is that you get halfway through and then think, no, this isn't something I really care about anymore. So before I embark on a project, I just have to test it. However, I test it by writing drafts of it, by living with it, by just thinking about it and really trying to dive into it. You have to be sure that you're going to be as happy to be as obsessed with this project 2.5, 3 years later as you are the day you commit to it.
Back to this theme of characters with very simple human objectives, to be reuniting their family, their children, their wife, and having to go through these incredible tasks. You've got 4 children, a family, and your wife is here, your producing partner. Oh, right, someone's applauding. I want to ask you about that relationship in a minute, but how do you balance out a life? And this is really just personal advice for me. I haven't figured out this part yet, but how do you balance out a life and shoot a film on 4 continents?
Well, it's challenging. The best part of that equation is to find yourself a partner as a producer and as a wife who's capable of raising 4 children while she produces the huge movie, and then not really pointing out how difficult that is.
Never mind.
But actually, I mean, from a creative point of view, the process of growing up, the process of maturing, of getting married and having kids, I've tried to use that in my work. I've tried to just always be driven by the things that are important to me, and I'm very fortunate to be able to work from home, and I can look out the window and see my kids playing on the grass, and that becomes the key image of Inception, because it's just, I'd rather be out there playing with them and seeing and writing a script, but you use that emotion, that tension. So
surely you could, at this point, what is it that motivates you to continue? What is it about making films that is so satisfying that it would compete with other,
I mean,
options?
That's a hard one to answer, really. It's just something that I feel extremely passionate about, that I would miss horribly if I weren't doing it in some form or other. So it's just something I always feel driven to do and enjoy thoroughly. I think these days that's also combined with a feeling of responsibility for the opportunities that I've been given. And I've had opportunities as a filmmaker that a lot of filmmakers would kill for. And so I feel a responsibility to try and do something with that and really maximize it. And I think both Emma and myself, we feel good about pushing the boundaries of studio filmmaking, about taking on things that maybe they were given on the filmmaker a hard time, but because our films are making money, we're in a position to be able to sort of negotiate for that with the studio.
So what is that responsibility?
I think it's a responsibility to use it to do something that you really care about, that you're really sincere about, and not do films for the sake of it or do it as a job, but do it as a passion, even though we've been working in the mainstream arena. We've been working in the mainstream of what movies can be, to never allow that position of films to dictate the passion that goes into it, or whatever the idiosyncrasies or the ambition, if you like.
Can you speak a little bit to those in the audience who might be in that position one day? standing at that crossroads where you feel the temptation of support that might come from interests that could be at odds with your own passion, which to me is one of the great challenges in navigating a career in film. If you understand what I'm saying,
no, it is. I think you're right. It's being a filmmaker, being a film director in employment terms, in industrial terms, in theatrical motion pictures, is a very paradoxical position, because you are hired by people who then give the appearance of wanting to control you, but they've hired you to defy them. They've hired you to have a point of view, and they know that as well. And so there's this weird tension. You really have been employed to be challenging, iconoclastic or maverick in some way. You're being paid to disregard those pressures, to straighten up, fly right. And no time has ever acknowledged that this is right. It sort of can't be, but it's the
I had it acknowledged once.
Really?
I probably shouldn't say, but I was in a meeting for Moneyball, and I'd done a version of the script, and went into the studio, and sat with Amy Pascal, and a group from the studio, and everyone had gone through this version of the script, and had taken pages of notes, and we just went around in a circle, everybody sharing their notes, and I thought very reasonably rejecting them, you know. Rationally, no because, and I thought it was a very effective and productive meeting because we all got a lot of clarity, I thought. I wasn't 5 minutes off the lot when Amy called and said, I'm only going to explain this once. We all know collectively at the studio, as a studio, that in the best circumstances, we will only ever exercise 4.5% influence over you, because you're the director. But when we have these meetings, you have to make everybody feel smart. And good, and I will never say this again. And then from that point forward, they continued to torture, but I had that kind of, I don't know how you learned that, but I needed somebody to tell it to me.
I think I learned it from Steven Soderbergh, because he very kindly was an executive producer on my first studio film, and I think it's on Insomnia. And I championed he did.
For
he had
Insomnia.
seen Memento, and he asked the studio to take a look at it, and then came on to Insomnia as executive producer with George, partners at the time. And when you get into that studio environment where there's a hierarchy of people whose jobs is literally they're being paid to give you notes, to tell you things, he had developed such a reasonable attitude to it that in no way compromised what he was trying to do creatively. There was an incredible example to behold, and a wonderful thing to see him in a meeting and talking, because it was all about respect for the other person's point of view. It was all about saying, okay, the note might be wrong, or the suggestion on how to fix it might be wrong, but they're saying it for a reason, and you have to figure out what that reason is. Admittedly, in any organization, sometimes that reason is ego or trying to impress their boss or whatever it is. But very often there's a creative reason, and you can either get it from the note itself, or you can go away and think about it, internalize it, and think about it yourself. He was such a master. He is such a master of that. I only say was because he claims to retire. He seems to be working an enormous amount. I'm glad to say. But he's so good at that, and I seized on that as a way of dealing with the studio system, because he showed me the possibilities of the incredible power of the studio machine and what it could be used for in a technical sense and in a creative sense. if you can find a way to, as you say, make everybody feel smart and feel enfranchised in what they're doing, and you know, make it feel like a real partnership. And as I've seen other people, you know, try and navigate these waters with varying degrees of success, you realise that fighting doesn't necessarily gain you any more than trying to have an effective, you know, collaboration. I mean, one of the things that I chose to do very early on was to always be on or ahead of schedule and always be on or under budget, because those are the two key things that immediately force the studio to come and look and judge what you're doing. I mean, they actually have a responsibility as soon as you're in budget or behind schedule to come to set and say, do you need this, do you need that? So I chose to sit with my crew and my head of department and make our own compromises, because it's all about compromise. Every day on a film shoot it's about compromise. You never have enough time or enough money, no matter how big the film is. It's the way they work. And so we make those compromises ourselves and try and own that as part of our creative process.
What Chris is saying is very sophisticated. It's a very sophisticated art, I think, in actuality, negotiating these interests. And at the end of the day, everybody does have the same interest, and everybody wants a great film, and everybody wants a visionary film. Everyone also wants it to be profitable, but for something to actually work, it has to be, it's an incredible imagination-defying, difficult coincidence of varied interests happening. And I think it's part of the medium, understanding all of it, the different powers and influences that are at work, and how to orchestrate, again, not to fight or resist necessarily, but to acknowledge and how to employ these things. And when it cannot be done gracefully, I think often it comes down to one side or the other being crushing. And more often than not, I mean, this is my unscientific view. I wonder if you have a view. I think it's the side of anxiety that wins. The side of anxiety about the economics of a film, and a marketing department's opinion begins to have more power than the filmmaker, if a film is taken over something. And there are different eras in film in which I think the power lies more with, and the credit lies more with the filmmaker, and at other times it's more with a committee and a studio of non-filmmakers. To me, it feels as if the economy tightened up in 2008, we entered like a new era of tension and difficulty, and I don't really know hardly anybody that it feels easy for, to strike that nice balance of respecting everybody's interest in getting away with it, unscathed. Do you have a view of how the economics of the industry and money has influenced, for better or for worse, the content that we see?
Yeah, I think, as you say, anxiety is always a massive force in every stage of the process. And one of the interesting things, you say, you were asking about confidence, and where does the confidence as a filmmaker come from? One of the things that happens is you have to develop confidence, or even the fake version of it, as the anxiety levels rise at the studio, because anxiety breeds anxiety, and if they see you're worried, or if they feel that you're worried, that will worry them more than anything. And so, whatever anxiety they're expressing, you have to be the person to reassure in the process somehow. And I think that's very, very important. And I think that you also have to recognize the economic anxiety that goes behind any film. And I do think everything is cyclical in the movie business, I think. But certainly, I think right now it's difficult for original films to get made. It's difficult for things that don't have an obvious selling point. You know, it's hard to base a film simply around casting or simply, there are no commercial guarantees and everything really. So it is difficult right now. At the same time, I think it's always difficult. You know, it's always a fight and a struggle. I would say there's certainly, you know, a huge reliance on, you know, what we call IP in the industry right now. You know, having a brand to the thing that's being made certainly helps get something made. And so when you're working outside of that, it's definitely more difficult. I've done both, and yeah, it's absolutely more difficult. The anxiety level is certainly higher.
Can you give us an example of a time when you were resisted?
I'm trying to think of it. I mean, my studio film experience has been extremely positive, and I think a lot of that is chance. A lot of that is we sort of hit the zeitgeist with the films we were making, and so when they make money, that gives everybody confidence. It's a bit of false confidence because they think, okay, this guy knows how to make a film that makes money. It's complete nonsense. So, you know, it's frankly about where you happen to pitch your story in relation to where people are interested in any moment.
But your films have been consistently profitable. What do you attribute it to?
I do attribute a lot of it to luck, and I'm not being falsely modest there. I'm really, you know, I've certainly tried to work in a mainstream fashion. I've certainly tried to be respectful of the audience, and I've tried to imagine myself as an audience member. But I think there's an enormous amount of luck involved, truthfully. You know, you're always, when you make a film, it's a very long-term bet. You're looking at years in the future. And so the idea that you can gauge what an audience is going to be interested in, or what a marketing department can sell, is, you know, completely untrue. I mean, the recent example actually is, you know, working with Matthew McConaughey on Interstellar, which once he won the Oscar for Best Actor, everyone at the studio particularly credited myself and everyone with great genius in sort of recognizing that he could. And the truth is, we cast him long before any of that happened. You know, I went down to see him when he was shooting True Detective, and I was a bit concerned I was going to do a TV show now, what's that going to be? And so we got incredibly lucky, and it's a combination of luck and knowing that he was right for the mark, and knowing that he was absolutely the guy in the studio, you know, was thrilled when his star then rose in such a spectacular fashion because of all the interesting work he can do. But it's always a leap of faith. It's that combination of saying, I know what I want creatively out of this piece of casting, and then getting a little lucky with the way the zeitgeist is going. I mean, that's key.
I probably think it's less luck than you do. But part of it is what you are consistently saying is that you're not really making decisions out of some kind of out-of-body, you know, rational process of what may or may not be marketable, but you know, you're following your passions. Somebody just was walking down here with a microphone. Are we meant to kick it out to the audience for some questions? I want to, not yet? Okay. I wanted to ask you anything else about working with your wife, working with your brother, and your collaborations in general. Do you find that you work consistently with people other than your wife and brother?
There are a lot of people that I've worked with. I tend to adopt the feeling of, I mean, to call it loyalty gives it a sort of, it gives it too virtuous a spin. It's really about when you work with somebody who's good at something, particularly when you learn something together. Like my former DP, who's now director, Wally Fiston, who you've worked with. You know, we kind of grew up together, and so there was incredible loyalty there because we sort of learned the business as we went, and so there was an ease of communication that developed over the years. I know the last film I worked with, Voyage of Voyage, was an amazing DP, and I had a wonderful experience, and I hope to repeat that. You know, so when you work with great people, you want to repeat the experience, and you want to surround yourself with people who will challenge you. And paradoxically, it's like the people most loyal to you are the ones who actually challenge you. It's the newcomers who are a little more, you know, concerned about, you know, not rocking the boat, you know, whatever. Whereas the people you work with in years, certainly my wife and my brother, no problem telling you.
Once you have a couple of successes, that becomes a peril because you no longer can necessarily trust or rely on people to mention the fact that you're making a terrible mistake.
Particularly when some of your success, as is true, I think, of any filmmaker, some of your success is based on counterintuitive decisions. Doing things that everybody says you're wrong, saying, you know what, I'm going to stick with this and then it succeeds. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that every counterintuitive decision you then make is wise. And so it becomes very difficult to gauge when to fight, when to sort of stand by something, when to kind of go, okay, everybody else thinks this won't work, maybe I better rethink it. And people you've known a long time, who you've been through a lot of different things with, those are the people who you tend to be able to orient the decision making the most effectively with.
So, this question of intuition and just cold, hard calculus of planning a film. I watched Memento again also, which is like a Fabergé egg, precise little miracle of a film. I mean, it's semi-astounding that that's your second film. It's so precise and it's so good. Do you feel like you are working intuitively when you make a film like that, or is that something that you had to?
It's an interesting question. My answer off the bat is I work intuitively, I work instinctively. But what I immediately realize is I do a lot of diagrams when I work. I do a lot of thinking about etching by Escher and things like that. I do a lot of thinking about not movie stories necessarily, but the way in which information can be presented, or these kind of mathematical equations, things like that. So that frees me to be intuitive in a strange way, finding a mathematical model or finding a geographical model for a story structure. That then frees me to be more intuitive. And so for me, it's a slightly funny combination of the scientific and the planning. Like I do write story outlines. I'll, as I say, sort of draw pictures, or draw diagrams, or draw things that somehow illustrate the movement or the rhythm of the thing I'm trying to do. And so it's a funny combination of intuition with, I don't know what you call it, geometry, I suppose.
Are there any filmmakers under the age of 30 that have attracted your attention and respect that you can think of?
Well, gosh, I don't know how old any of these filmmakers are. Yeah, you put me on the spot a little bit, but I really loved Whiplash last year. I thought that was an incredible piece of work. And that was, the kind of film where, as a filmmaker, you see it and it's very precisely put together, and you're very jealous about it. Like there's no wastage, it knows exactly what it wants to do, and it just does it. And that was very exciting to see.
Did you, other than Stephen Frears, did you have a mentor of sorts?
I mean, really, Steven Soderbergh, I would say, was a tremendous influence on me. I think at a very important time. That entering into the studio system is a very delicate time, and I was very grateful to have him around. But one of the things that he taught me very early on is it's an individual pursuit. You have to get out there and find the rules for yourself. And, whether it's working with particular actors or at a particular studio or in a particular field, you have to make your own rules. You have to figure out what's going to work for you. It's paradoxical, but it's like that's the thing he taught me is you're on your own. You have to get out there and make it work.
So I have kick it out if there are any questions. No questions. I can only see vague outlines. Can you hand that mic to one of these hands?
Hi, Chris. So the first experience I had to your films was Batman Begins when I was like 9 years old, and that really had a huge impact on my thoughts about film and like superhero movies. And I know a lot of people credit you with like starting the new superhero like wave. That was obviously like when you guys were talking earlier about IPs and established properties. And I was just wondering, is there any established property like or previous existing story that interests you to like reimagine or reshape in a new and interesting way?
Well, if there were, I'd be crazy to tell you about it.
Next question.
I'm trying to give a less facetious answer, but it kind of really is the answer. But no, I'm always on the lookout for an opportunity to reimagine something or rebuild something.
Yeah, go. Just you make your own decision.
So, Chris, you're responsible for some of the most amazing sequences we've seen on screen ever. And what's amazing is that they're all done, primarily with practical effects, and not in this age of technology where digital effects have taken over everything. So I'd imagine that gives you a sense of attachment to a lot of these sequences that some directors might not even get. And so I gotta put you on the spot and ask you, try to name one, if not a couple, of the sequences or shots that you are the most proud of in what has so far been, to me, the most illustrious filmmaking career I've ever seen. So, thanks.
Well, thank you. I think, it's a little bit hard for me to have perspective on it, but if you're talking pure mechanics, I suppose, and, I think the beginning of Dark Knight Rises is scene with the C-130 in the airplane, which we shot largely practically, we did it very efficiently. It took us about 2 days up in Scotland, and it was an incredible sort of coming together of months and months of planning by a lot of different members of the team who worked for months rehearsing all these parachute jumps and wing walking and all these different things. And so for me as a filmmaker, I literally flew up to Scotland and spent 2 days in a helicopter, and we were done. And we'd scheduled it for 5 days. And the visual effects work in the sequence is very minimal. It's important, but it's minimal. And I was really amazed by what the team we had put together were able to achieve using very sort of old-fashioned methods in a way. And I was very proud of the way that came together.
On Interstellar, is it true that there were little or no green screen?
Yeah.
Screen projection, or how did you?
We developed a new form of front screen projection using digital projectors where you can what they call keystone correct digitally very quickly. So we, rather than using front screen projection as a paint a backdrop outside the windows, we would set the shot and then set the projector just for the image area we're seeing. That way we're able to use only 2 projectors and get a very bright image and really put the real stuff out the window, which was much more fun to shoot, much more interesting.
It's also old school. When you contacted me, I don't know, a year ago about this film preservation stuff, I don't have an email address, you don't have an email. You're doing these things old school style. Is your interest in preserving film just because you're a Luddite, or is there something special about film? Why do you care?
I care because film has the best imaging capabilities that exist, and I think that a lot of the threat to film in production particularly is a little short-sighted and a little financially driven, and I think that I'm fortunate to be in a position to be able to stand up for what I believe in, and I want to try and give voice to many other filmmakers I spoke to, yourself, many others, working at all different budget levels, all different types of film, who love this stuff. And to a certain extent, you know, as far as me being a Luddite, I mean, I use the stuff that's best for the job at hand. And, you know, when I talk about the front projection system we used, you know, that's unthinkable 20, 30 years ago. It relies on the absolute most cutting-edge technology today. I edit on a computer, right? You know, edit on Tribeca anymore because it's more efficient. I shoot film because it's the best way of capturing an image and preserving an image. And so it's just important to keep that as a choice for filmmakers. I feel the responsibility to do everything I can to keep that choice for all types of filmmakers.
How's it going? And what's your honest projection about what's going to happen?
Well, I don't want to speculate too far in the future, but it's going well. And you know, Kodak at a summit we did in Getty recently in LA. You know, Jeff Clark, CEO, stood up and said they're absolutely committed to film forever and interested in exploring, you know, if there are new demands we may on the stock or what you might want out of it for your imaging. You know, I was pleased to see in England the other day that this mobile lab is now being constructed, which can come to your set and process 20,000 feet a day. And you know, so things are changing, the infrastructure is changing, and I think it's evolving into something that hopefully will be there for us as a choice. And my real push is to get us out of this area we're in right now, where the choice of imaging technology has been given to the line producer and the studio executives. I want to put it back in the hands of the directors and the DPs.
There's somebody in the shadows giving me some sign language. What does that mean? What? Oh.
Hello. Yes, I have. Hello. How's everybody doing? Hi, Chris. My name is Michael. I am an actor, and I wanted to know, as an actor, we have our certain methods and ways that we approach a project. Over the years, from your first film to now, how has your method in approaching a project changed, and what is that method?
Well, I think it's changed really. I'd say it's just evolved into a process really of trying to be the director that an individual actor needs me to be. And I think every actor's needs are different. And what I love about great actors, and I've been very fortunate to work with some really incredible actors, is I found their process to be different and unique always. But when they're in a scene with another actor with a different process, somehow there's this way they have of accommodating each other and finding each other's rhythm. And it's that sort of transfer of energy that I find very inspiring and kind of miraculous. And I think what I try to be an audience for my actors. I try and simply delight in the work they're doing and try and give them feedback on that from that point of view. I'm not an actor myself, and never have been, so I don't have any. I'm not trying to impose a rigid idea of what it should be on them.
I want to know how much in the pre-production and while you're writing, in the center report, how much is in the pre-production your eye focus on the audience reaction? Because many movies you're understanding with the movie going on, or I'm thinking of Batman, that we're evolving with him, with new gear and new things. Thanks.
I think for me, at every stage of the process, I try to be the audience. I try to be watching the film as I'm imagining it. I try to be a member of the audience. So your expectations as an audience member, they're different depending on what type of film you're going to see, what the budget is, what your expectation is, either of spectacle or a drama. And so I don't think of the audience as somebody else. I don't think of it as us and them. I think we're all the audience. I think I'm part of the audience, and I try to be true to what I would want to see and would enjoy watching in the type of film we're making.
Hi. First of all, thank you for everything you've done for the mainstream blockbuster and making it such an international thing. My brother and I have actually moved halfway across the world to hopefully make our own film someday because we've been watching yours for a long time. And the question I have is, since you write with your brother as well, what is that process like in terms of the creative clashes, the creative compromises that you might have to make?
Well, it's been different on every film, really, working with Jonah. It sort of depends on where the stories come from. In the case of Memento, that was a short story he was in the process of writing, and he told me the idea for it. So I went off and I did the script on my own. With The Prestige, that was a book that we adapted, and he spent years working on it, and then I took it over at a late stage. Interstellar was a script he'd worked on for years for Steven Spielberg. And then he was too busy to collaborate closely with me. He was off doing his own thing, so I took the script and wrote it. We've always just sort of used each other as a sounding board, and we've never really sort of sat in the same room writing together. It tends to be a process of discussing things, and then whoever's working on the draft at the time doing their version of it, and then passing that to the other. The things will go back and forth, sometimes for years.
This is my brother.
Hey, how you doing? This is more of a selfish question for me, but at the end of Inception, starts to move a little bit. I want to know if you and your brother, do you guys have, does he have a theory or you have a theory? I gotta know what happens to later.
I asked the same question last night, and he told me the answer, but he said that it's not really for public consumption.
I'm certainly not going to answer that, or I would have in the film, but I will. You asked about my brother, and he didn't work with me on Inception, although he was, always gives great advice. But on our earlier film, Memento, which was based on his short story, we all worked at the Venice Film Festival when it premiered, and we got a very, very excited reaction to it. We did a press conference afterwards, and somebody asked about my interpretation of the ending, and I said, well, it's still up for the audience to decide, but this is what it means to me, and I gave in great detail exactly what the ambiguities of the film were to me. And he very gently said to me afterwards, he said, you don't understand, nobody hears that first bit where you say, well, it's really up to the audience. So if you then give your interpretation of everything, and so fortunately nobody recorded it, whatever. And that was the last time I ever opened my mouth on those
Two more questions. Right here. Chris.
Chris, thanks for taking us when you were 7 years old and 12 years old and making Space Wars and everything. I want to know that when you wrote Following, was there prior to writing or the idea of Following, was there a moment that you thought that, okay, I'm going to be making films, or this is it for me? Was there like a God speaking to you or something that figured out that this is it?
No, I mean, in truth, for me, it was a sort of continuous process of making longer and more involved films, and so I'd done, films, starting to do 16mm films, films with sound, films with more of a story, a 5-minute film, a 10-minute film, whereas it had a very natural evolution. So Following to me was a film that it just sort of moved the ball forward slightly in technical terms, and so there wasn't really a moment where I kind of, well, actually, I said that as I'm talking about it, I realized the first time we showed it to sort of paying customers, which was at the San Francisco Film Festival, there was an audience of 400 people or something. That was certainly a moment where you realized, oh, okay, I made an actual narrative feature, and I made a film that I've got to sit through with an audience and hope they don't get bored while I'm watching it. And that was certainly a big moment, but everything what we've been talking about this evening. I mean, really, for me, filmmaking's always been a very evolutionary process, just trying to build on what had come before.
Last question.
Hi, woman.
A woman.
I was just curious, you execute such brilliant action scenes, but you also work so wonderfully with your actors. And I was curious how you approach a scene, and how you guide your actors through the rehearsal process.
Sorry, could you just clarify that a tiny bit? I missed the beginning of it. Which type of sequence?
I was really just curious with a scene that you have between two actors, be it a dramatic scene or a scene that really has a deep material. How do you approach the rehearsal process with your actors?
Well, I mean, you feel out what you think the actor is going to benefit from. Sometimes that's rehearsal, sometimes it's not. Usually I'll do a few days with the actors before we start shooting anything, where we discuss the most important scenes, the scenes they're the most worried about. I try and be led by their process mostly, and we will sit there and read the scene, not necessarily acting it in any way, just talking about it, and then talk about the subtext, what I think is important in the scene, what they think is important, and sometimes there's a little bit of rewriting based on that. So on the day, usually we've had some discussion, but not extensive rehearsal. So what they're doing is fresh and fascinating to me. But we will have talked about the text and kind of got the basic parameters. But really try and customize that for each situation and each cast.
Thank you, Chris.